Hello again, friends. This is Dawn Boyani Sandberg from Rocky Mountain Somatics, and I wanted to talk to you about a subject that I've been wanting to speak on for quite a long time, and that is the weaponization of boundaries and ghosting people and how we can do better. I think, there's been so much talk in the past few years around setting healthy boundaries in relationships with toxicity, and then with the confluence of boundary talk and social media. There's a tendency for people to implement these boundaries by using, dating apps or social media to pretty aggressively cut and block people off. And I wanted to talk about the tendency to do that and the kind of difference between setting healthy boundaries and then using these techniques of social media or psychological emotional boundaries as a way to weaponize what looks like health, but in fact is actually a form of aggression and hurt and very, very destructive and maladaptive. So I just have a couple stories to tell you. The first story is that I came from a pretty dysfunctional family on the East Coast that played a lot of emotional mind games and punishment and silent treatment. They were really hostile, kind of mean people. And, it's taken me hundreds of thousands of dollars of therapy and wellness work and self love and Dharma practice and professional help to undo a lot of the damage of the family that I came from. I don't know, when you've been damaged from your family of origin, I don't know if those patterns ever completely go away. But if you are honest with yourself, are able to accept help, and really process out everything that happens to you, I believe that people can overcome pretty significant damage from their family of origin. And with the family of origin, part of what we would do in our family is we would ghost people, block them, the silent treatment. And the silent treatment was always commensurate with the level of the perceived injury. So if a family member, confronted someone who had been hurtful, that family member now got sort of bullied and triangulated against with the whole family, and then no one would talk to them. And this could go on for like days, months, weeks, and even years. And my family would sort of cycle around punishing one person or the other and not speaking to them. And then the whole family would group together and create a story around the perceived injury and, kind of circled around for different family members. This is like quintessential dark, dysfunctional family. It's caused me a tremendous amount of anguish over the years, but it's been grist for the mill. So I'm grateful that I had that family because it's given me an opportunity to grow. But so that would be a great example of, you confront someone after they've been hurtful. And if they are narcissistic, borderline, some type of cluster B personality, one of the gravest things you can do is to confront someone who's hurt you. Then what comes back is a super amount of self-defense, counter blame they're not able to hear you, and then ultimately you'll get silenced or blocked and cut out. And this happens in family systems, relationships. So now I think we're using a lot of social media like this. If a person says something politically or emotionally, if you're on a dating site, you don't want to see the person anymore, we just go ahead and hit the block button, and it's kind of like intensely aggressive and hurtful. I understand if someone's harassing you, or I get sometimes like unwanted contact from people who I don't know, and then I will block them. But if you're in a emotional relationship with someone who's a friend, someone in your community, a family member, and you just block them as a way to call that a boundary, and you're not able to hear what they're saying, especially if they're offering you feedback around something that you had done that's hurtful, well, this would be a great example of using the weaponization of boundaries. I'm just going to maintain my view of myself. I don't want to hear any feedback, and I'll block anyone, sort of like Smokey the Bear, go out and, snuff out anyone or anything that can injure your perceived self-esteem, and you can continue to hurt people and not be able to hear feedback. This is a dysfunctional way of working with boundaries. These are not really boundaries. This is more like something else. It's actually a facet of ego, hostility, and aggression, and it's exceedingly maladaptive. This is not healthy boundaries. This is being cruel to people, not hearing feedback, and it's almost like a complete silencing, murderous assault to block someone out of your life. It's exceedingly cruel, and can do a lot of damage. A healthier way, if you were well adapted, is of course you would hear the person's feedback and have a relational repair, which is the ability to have conversations, discuss things, learn, grow, move on, apologize. That's how well adjusted people do stuff. It's not block everyone and ghost people. I mean, it's like, I feel like the ghosting and blocking is intensely cruel, unless, of course, there's some situation where someone's harassing you. So that's the family of origin that I came from, and I'm seeing the implementation of some of these unhealthy patterns kind of in our social milieu right now with these forums, and I think we can do better. I studied with an amazing spiritual teacher, and I'm just realizing some of the impact of having studied with him, and how these simple moments of being with a spiritual teacher, I studied with Tokugawa Rinpoche, impacted me now, and it's been decades later. And I wanted to share with you one story about boundaries and how he was compared to how we are right now. So people would come to him with all kinds of problems because he was a spiritual teacher. So I recall one time a woman had come and kneeled in front of him and said, my husband just died, and I'm left alone with these children, and I don't know what to do. I didn't really hear the whole story because they were speaking in a different language, and I could see the way that he looked at her. You could see the pain in his face by hearing such a tragic story. It was like it completely broke his heart. There was no filter. It was like, you could actually see like his heart literally breaking, and the pain without filter. So it wasn't like he was like, oh, I'm some holy person, don't say anything to upset me, I'm so almighty. It was like absolutely raw and absolutely present with her, without any fear, without any altering of anything, just this raw, beating heart response to a really painful thing. It was completely compassionate. But the interesting thing, and the difference between maybe himself and me, is that the moment that he heard that story, his heart broke. It also discharged from his mind. You could see, and then the pain, like you could see, go away from his face and his gestalt. And then he started to offer her teaching. So, what can you do? Do you have any family? He would begin to start being there for her. It was like the painful story didn't stick to anything. It just kind of dissolved. We talk about like snowflakes on a warm rock, like disturbing emotions with an enlightened being don't stick to anything. They don't have to get into a situation where they're taking in pleasure and pushing away pain in this ego matrix around you. That's not how my teacher was. He was just raw and vulnerable and ultra human and ultra present, such that he could be there and offer consoling advice to someone. But it wasn't that he was in this kind of checked out, dissociated spiritual dimension. He was like really grounded and right there with her. So this is like the opposite of my family of origin, which would play games with people and hurt people and continue to have maladaptive patterns. He would be open, but nothing would stick. See, it's the not sticking part that I found to be striking. So basically, some examples of the weaponization of boundaries would be giving someone the silent treatment, social media blocking, being passive aggressive, having something come to you and you can't handle it, so you sort of check out into an ether, go into an escapist mode which would be the beginnings of a dissociative disorder, some type of escapism. They talk about religion as the opiate of the masses, using our religion to not feel anything, to not get our hands dirty, to not be hurt by all this worldly stuff. This is quintessential escapism. It is not enlightened. It is not how my teacher showed himself in the world. A lot of the times, I know in my case, we can have unresolved childhood trauma and then use our religion as a way to feel, holier and spiritual, and it's a quintessential escapism. So using religious tenets to kind of dissociate and escape, not feel anything, again, not enlightened. Narcissistic discard, if you happen to be narcissistic and callous, just discarding people, ghosting people, and just basically pushing people away who hurt you. These are not healthy boundaries. This is ego-based, aggression that maintains the ego structure. It maintains maladaptive patterns of relating in the world, and it's not real boundaries. So, do you remember the movie like Pink Floyd, The Wall? Everything becomes another brick in the wall. So we grow up and we have painful things, and then, mother issues, father issues, brother and sister issues, school issues, relational issues. So each one of these things in our lives can become bricks in the wall that we wound up, pulling ourselves further and further away from reality, from the texture and the feeling of this life, which can be hurtful. And so we develop a giant ego of a high wall. And at the end of that movie, he actually becomes significantly dissociated and schizophrenic. I think it's about Sid Barrett, but it's about building the wall of ego. So we don't want to use these new terms of boundaries to actually build Pink Floyd's The Wall around us and sort of escape into oblivion and not really feel and be present in this life in a healthy way. So again, I think we can do better. I have an example of healthy boundaries in my own marriage that I wanted to share with you. So when I first met my husband, I think we met in 2000 and we got together in 2001. And I was trying to quit smoking. I belonged to a spiritual community that was big on smoking, believe it or not. So we all sort of smoked. And I would I would sneak cigarettes. I would buy a pack of cigarettes, keep them at the liquor store, and ask the liquor store owner if I could go once a day and take one of the cigarettes, and I would smoke it. And it would be this, big deal for me. And I was dating my husband. His name is Christian. And I would sneak the cigarette. And he, when I would come to see him afterwards, he would say to me, "I can tell you've been smoking." And he threatened to break up with me. He said, "You know what? I don't want to date a smoker. I don't want to date someone that would be injuring their health. I don't want to watch you become ill over the years." So he basically said, it's either me or the one cigarette per day. And first I thought it was a little bit hurtful, like, gosh, you're kind of giving me an ultimatum, let me be me. But then I realized, well, I didn't want to lose him. And I realized he was completely right. And he had a right to decide in his life what types of things were acceptable and what types of things were not acceptable. So that was a boundary for him. I don't want to date a smoker. So I thank him for helping me and sort of pushing me ultimately to give up a really unhealthy pattern. So that's a really good type of boundary. I know myself. I know what's toxic and what's not toxic, and I know how to communicate that in a loving way. He didn't tell me off. It wasn't based on hostility. The boundary for him was based on love, and those types of boundaries provide help. They're not contributing to this toxic matrix that we're talking about. So I think that healthy boundaries have to do with respect, not wanting unhealthy things in your life. You won't tolerate emotional abuse, physical abuse, game playing, mental violence. You're allowed to say that those things are not okay in my life. And if a person still continues to treat you in that way, then you can at that point walk away. But give them quite a few chances and make sure that you're not counter projecting and just having blind spots of something that they're trying to show you or trying to have you recognize, and you just turn it around and walk away. So I think it's a delicate situation right now. um, you know, I think healthy boundaries, if you go back to the example of my teacher, or even better, if you've ever seen any, the movie The Little Buddha with Keanu Reeves, or read a story of the life of the Buddha, um, you have at the end, at the moment he attains enlightenment, and you have Mara, which is uh, the obstructing spirit of that's trying to tempt the Buddha to not attain enlightenment. And he's doing all this stuff to kind of upset the Buddha. And the Buddha's sitting under the tree, and Mara's like sending women to tempt him, and all this kind of stuff, and shooting arrows at him. And so as these arrows of Mara are coming into the Buddha's space as he's sitting under the tree, the arrows come in as flower petals into his space. So what does that mean? That means if a person actually is, um, somewhat grounded and clear, uh, and open, that a negative attack can come into your space, something hurtful, some nefarious attempt to hurt you, or or just inadvertent pain, or suffering, or TV that we're watching, or news that's really horrible. As it comes into your space, your field of wisdom and awareness, it will transmute a little bit into your space. So as an attack comes, you're immediately going to meet that with a sense of warmth, groundedness, clarity, compassion, and strength. And then you'll respond in a way that's imbued with wisdom, rather than this neurotic, aggressive blocking and ghosting. That's not the right kind of boundary. The boundary is almost like a protective field of light around you that can be cultivated through spiritual practice and wellness. So when things that are toxic come into your space, you almost have kind of a, semi-permeable membrane of light around you, because of the power and efficacy of your heart and your mind and your wisdom, that things don't come into you that are going to stick and become toxic, like the example of my teacher. Things don't stick. You Things kind of not really bounce off, because you feel everything. Things come in, but your space is so filled with warmth that it's like the snowflake on a warm rock. Things dissolve into your space because of the power that you can cultivate. So I think that that's, for me, the difference between a weaponized boundary and a healthy boundary. The healthy boundary comes from the power of your compassion. So if we train as, in a yogic or spiritual or Buddhist tradition, our training would be one of meditation and yoga and spiritual practices and education that fortify us to become more grounded and compassionate. We don't use an entire religion to not get involved with worldly stuff and then escape. This is not yogic. I mean, even if the Buddha, or even the Buddha and Milarepa, all of these people at some point who attained enlightenment got back up off the cushion and re-entered the world and helped. I think that using the religion to dissociate, to escape, to not have to feel pain, anytime you're doing that, that is not enlightened. The basic MO of ego is that we take in what is pleasurable and we push out what is harmful. So anytime we're kind of metering what comes into our world in this, um, you know, strategic, aggressive way that's, always cooking up something, chasing things and blocking, chasing, blocking. That's how ego works. My teacher wasn't like that. He sat like a mountain, literally like a light, and was open and tender, and things didn't stick. So if we're using retreat practice to escape and check out because we can't be bothered by worldly things, that to me is the opposite of what it would be to be enlightened or a Buddhist or a compassionate person. We have vows that we take to help the world, and those vows would do the opposite. You actually would go to the places that you would be able to be most of help. So nowadays it might be getting involved with participatory democracy, trying to help with our current political situation, people in need. So you actually almost look around like, what can I do to help? What skills do I have? I'm going to not be lazy. I'm not going to just be in the privileged ivory tower of a retreat cabin all the time. I'm actually going to come out and get my hands dirty and help the world, because those are my vows. So escapism, blocking, ghosting, being hostile, strategic energy of grasping at things and blocking things, those are all maladaptive patterns. This is not healthy boundaries. Healthy boundaries are a natural facet of a being that has worked through a lot of childhood, issues and patterns, tear down the bricks of the wall rather than put up, ironclad, protective barriers around them. In Tibetan Buddhism, we call it like a Buddha field. A Buddha field is a being of light and wisdom, not a being of, stay away, don't bother me, don't mess up my quietude. I mean, that is the, opposite of everything that I've ever known as a Buddhist. So I wanted us to all rethink using social media as a way to engender harm, hurt, hatred, ghosting, blocking, and the yucky stuff that from my family of origin. I think we can go a little bit deeper and open further, and we can find a strength of groundedness, clarity, openness, and warmth that we may never have previously known. But it really is something that is not too far away from our capacity. So if we're going to use meditation and yoga in our practices and therapy, the goal would be one of a grounded person that has healthy boundaries, but is not using these new techniques of boundaries in order to be hostile in the world and run away. So thank you so much for listening.